Vance said 8 words to Nancy Pelosi. Only 8. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then she did something she had never done during 4 decades in Washington. She picked up her folder, rose from her chair, and walked out. No response. No defense. And by that night, not a single Democrat had spoken one word in her defense. Not one. Whatever was inside that red folder had brought everything to an end, and it all began with one number, 838%. That was how much one family's stock portfolio had grown in 10 years, while the broader market had risen only 256%. No hedge fund on Wall Street had ever produced results like that. And the woman connected to those trades was not a professional money manager. She helped write the laws that every market participant was required to follow. Pelosi entered Dirksen 138 and adjusted the microphone. Across the table, Vance sat silently with a closed red folder resting in front of him. He said nothing, so she spoke first. "Senator," she began, her voice carrying the relaxed warmth of someone greeting a younger colleague at a reception, "I was sitting in rooms exactly like this while you were still in Ohio writing your book. I have testified more times than either of us could possibly count. So let us not pretend this morning is going to be difficult for me or for either of us." Vance gave one slow nod, as though she had made an entirely reasonable point. 838%, he said. "That is the number I cannot stop returning to. I read it 3 different times because the first 2 times I was convinced I had misunderstood it." "Public information," Pelosi replied, making a small dismissive motion with her hand. "Every filing is available to anyone in this country who has a computer and 5 minutes." "It is," Vance agreed. He reached toward the chair beside him and lifted a red folder. He placed it carefully on the table, aligned the edges with 2 fingers, and left it unopened. "There is a particular day documented in this folder," he said. "End of Jade to Nan. 1 day in September. 1 individual trade. We will reach it before this hearing is finished, but I want to take the slow route getting there, because only the slow route allows someone to fully understand what that day means." Pelosi's gaze lowered briefly toward the red folder before returning to his face. Her smile remained perfectly still. "I do not trade stocks, Senator," she said. "My husband does. I assume you already know that. I believe everyone in this room knows it." "I know that is what you have said," Vance answered. He did not open the folder. He left it between them, its red cover standing out against the polished dark wood. The camera positioned at the rear of the room remained focused on it long after Vance had turned his attention elsewhere. "Let us begin with 1 year," Vance said. "The year 2024. During those 12 months, your family's portfolio produced a return of 70.9%. Over that same period, the market as a whole returned 24.9%. In other words, you nearly tripled the market in a single year. Is that figure accurate? If that is what the filings show, then that is what the filings show." Pelosi folded her hands neatly on the table. "I do not spend my time memorizing percentages, Senator. I have a country to help govern." "Then allow me to explain what that percentage means," he said. He allowed the sentence to settle by itself, like a man lowering something heavy onto a table. That was not simply a good year. A good year is when someone beats the market by 2 points, perhaps 3, and considers themselves fortunate. This was not fortune. A result like that does not occur accidentally. Somewhere in this country tonight, there is a man who spent 30 years working on an assembly line. He checked his retirement account during that same year, saw that it had increased by 4%, and felt thankful. 4%. Your family made 70. He received the market. You received something else. Pelosi raised her chin. When she responded, her voice carried the sharp, polished confidence of a woman who had been waiting for this exact question. "Let me make this perfectly clear, since you appear determined to circle around the issue. Every trade my family has ever made was publicly disclosed within 45 days, precisely as the law requires. Nothing was concealed, nothing was secret. Every detail was placed in public view for anyone in this country to examine. So I will ask you directly, Senator, what exactly do you believe you are accusing me of?" It was a powerful response. It was the response of someone who had delivered those same words in many similar rooms and watched them succeed every time. For a moment, her answer filled the chamber, creating the impression that she had already ended the discussion. Then Vance took her answer gently, almost as if he were accepting something she had placed in his hands. He turned it over and revealed its other side to the room. "I am not accusing you of violating the law," he said. "That is the part nearly everyone misunderstands. I believe you when you say that every trade was legal. I am not here to ask why you broke the rules. I am here to ask why the rules were constructed in a way that allowed you to outperform the market by 46 points in 1 year while you were among the very people responsible for writing those rules." He paused before continuing. "Because that difference is not merely a number printed on paper. Every point your family gained above the market came from somewhere. It came from the retirement account of a school teacher in Dayton who placed her savings into an index fund and prayed it would remain secure. It came from the pension of a steel worker who spent 30 years on a factory floor and trusted that the market available to him was the same market available to the people inside this building. It came from a nurse's 401k, not one nurse, millions of people. They entered the same game you entered. They were simply never given the same cards." Pelosi remained silent for several seconds. The quiet lengthened. "That is a deeply emotional speech," she finally said, the warmth now gone from her voice. "It also has absolutely nothing to do with me." "Let us determine that," Vance replied. He opened a thin file, not the red folder, but a separate document, and looked down. "In December 2022, your household's portfolio moved heavily into semiconductor investments, including substantial positions in a company called NVIDIA. Only weeks afterward, the Congress you led voted on legislation that would shape the future of the American semiconductor industry. The CHIPS subsidies directed billions of federal dollars toward the same sector your family had just finished investing in. My husband manages our portfolio," Pelosi said. "I do not monitor those trades. I do not sit in front of a computer placing orders. He takes care of all of it. That has always been the arrangement in our household." Vance did not challenge her. He did not raise his voice, nor did he lean across the table. Instead, he wrote a single sentence on the yellow legal pad in front of him and allowed her to watch. He was not debating her. He was gathering her words. Each time she lifted the same shield, he accepted the language she offered, placed it carefully to one side, and preserved it. She could not yet see that she was handing him, piece by piece, the very material he planned to use later. "I understand," he said. "Your husband controls the investments. You do not monitor them. I want to ensure that I have recorded that correctly for the official record." "You have it correctly." "Good," Vance said softly. "That is important. It will become more important than you realize." He studied his notes for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. All sharpness had disappeared, replaced by something slower and heavier than anything he had said before. "My mother worked for her entire life in Ohio. Whenever she could, she saved a little money. By the time she was finally ready to rest, inflation had reduced most of those savings to almost nothing. She participated in the same market you participated in. She was simply never present in the room where the decisions affecting that market were made." The hearing room fell silent. No one took notes. For a long moment, not a single person inside Dirksen 138 spoke. Vance closed the thin file and placed it aside. When he resumed, he did not introduce another percentage. Instead, he shifted the ground beneath Pelosi's feet. "I want to take you back to the spring of 2020, he said. "Not to a particular trade, but to a particular week. Do you remember that spring?" "I remember all of it," Pelosi answered. "It was a terrible period for this country." It was. Let me describe what that week looked like for the people watching this hearing today. Food bank lines stretched around one block and continued down another. Families remained in their cars for hours, their children sitting in the back seats, waiting to receive a box of groceries. Small businesses that had survived for 40 years were permanently shutting their doors. And the Paycheck Protection Program, the only thing keeping the lights on for millions of small businesses, had just exhausted its funding. "I am fully aware of what that spring was like," Pelosi said. "I experienced it from inside this building." You did, Vance replied, and during that same week you appeared from your home on a late-night television program. You opened your freezer for the camera, a $24,000 freezer filled with gourmet ice cream costing $13 a pint. You smiled and explained how you were coping with those difficult days. For the first time that morning, something briefly crossed Pelosi's face. She caught it immediately and concealed it. That was a human moment, she said. It was edited, clipped, and turned into a weapon by people exactly like you. Everyone found a small personal way to survive that spring. Mine happened to include ice cream. I will not apologize for appearing human on television. Again, it was a genuine response. There was truth inside it. A person was entitled to an ordinary human moment, and Vance did not attack the ice cream. He abandoned that subject entirely and reached instead for what lay beneath it, the words she had publicly used. I am not concerned with the freezer, he said. The freezer is not the issue. The issue is what you chose to call relief. He continued. That same year, when payments finally reached families who had lost almost everything, payments of $600, you stood on the House floor and described that amount as significant. $600. Significant. Yet 2 years earlier, when working families received $1,200 through a tax reduction, you stood in nearly the same location and described that money as crumbs. He allowed the two words to remain beside each other in the air. Crumbs when the payment came from the opposing side, significant when it came from yours. The same family sitting around the same kitchen table, the same $600. The only difference was the name attached to it. You are compressing decades of context into a convenient soundbite, Pelosi said, although her words came slightly faster now. Then allow me to restore the context, Vance replied. Let me explain who those crumbs belong to. They belong to a family that lost the diner it had operated for 2 generations and needed that payment to cover one final month of rent on a building where it no longer had a functioning business. They belong to a veteran who remained on hold with the unemployment office for 6 hours, only to be instructed to call again the following day. They belong to a single mother sitting at her kitchen table at midnight, comparing $600 against a pile of bills and discovering that the numbers still did not work. To you, standing on the House floor, it was a figure inside a speech. To them, it represented the entire month. The room had become completely still. You have no understanding of what those people's lives were like, Pelosi said. I was raised inside one of those lives, Vance answered. That is the distinction between us. You learned about those families from a briefing document. I sat at their dinner table. Pelosi's hand shifted. She reached toward the glass of water in front of her, wrapped her fingers around it, but did not raise it. She held it for a moment, then released it without drinking. Then she counterattacked, her voice rising as she spoke. You want to discuss honesty, Senator? You wrote an entire best-selling book attacking the very people responsible for placing you in that chair, the people from your own hometown, your own relatives. You built your career by criticizing your own community, and now you sit there lecturing me about integrity. For a moment, every face in the room turned toward him. It was the strongest blow she had attempted all morning. Vance did not react. He did not deny the accusation. He permitted it to land, then lifted it exactly as he had lifted everything else and transformed it into the one thing she did not want it to become. Yes, he said plainly, I did. I wrote about my own people. I criticized them when I believed they were wrong, and I placed my name on the cover where anyone could find those words and use them against me. He paused. You have spent almost 40 years in public office. Name one occasion when you did the same. Name one moment when you publicly told your own side that it was wrong, knowing that doing so would personally cost you something. Pelosi opened her mouth. Nothing followed. Vance's next sentence was shorter than anything else he had said. That is what I expected. He allowed the silence to remain a moment longer. Then he advanced toward the final subject, the steepest ground they had crossed that morning. For years, he said, a straightforward proposal sat before you, prohibit members of Congress and their spouses from trading individual stocks while holding public office. No more purchasing or selling shares in the same companies whose industries you were responsible for regulating. One clear, unmistakable boundary. And for years, at every opportunity, you opposed it. That is an outrageous simplification of a genuinely complex matter, and you know it. You described it as a question of freedom, Vance said. Those were your words, not mine. You argued that members of Congress should remain free to participate in the stock market like every other American citizen. You said it publicly. You said it repeatedly. You maintained that position for years while the proposed ban remained on a shelf waiting for a floor vote that you refused to schedule. I have consistently supported transparency rather than prohibition, Pelosi answered. Disclosure, not bans. That has been my position throughout my career, and I continue to stand behind it. It was your position, Vance agreed, until the moment it ceased to be. He continued. And this is the part I want every person in the country to hear clearly. You did not reverse your position midway through your career when doing so might have imposed a meaningful cost on you. You did not change it when years of additional trading still lay ahead. You changed it at the very end, during your final term, after the portfolio had already expanded from $30 million to $278 million. You reversed yourself at the precise moment the game had ended, and there was nothing remaining on the table for you to sacrifice. My position evolved over time, Pelosi said. That is what thoughtful people do, Senator. They learn, they mature, they evolve. The word remained suspended in the air, thin and fragile. You did not evolve, Vance replied. His tone was quiet now, almost kind, which somehow made the words more severe. You were finished. Those are not the same thing, and I believe you understand the difference. A person evolves when they accept change, while that change still requires them to surrender something. You waited until you had collected everything available to collect. Then you abandoned something you no longer needed and asked the country to applaud it as personal growth. The atmosphere inside the chamber shifted. Some invisible pressure moved through the room, and Pelosi appeared to feel it closing around her. She reached backward through every exchange for the oldest protection she possessed, the same shield she had carried into the hearing. My husband executes the trades, she said. I have explained that repeatedly. I do not track them. I do not personally place them. I am not familiar with the detailed decisions. She heard the weakness in the words as soon as they left her mouth. Everyone else heard it as well. It was the fourth time she had used the same answer. It had worked the first time, weakened the second, and by the fourth repetition, it resembled a coat from which every piece of fabric had been worn away. Yet she still held it against the cold, hoping nobody could see through it. Her hand moved toward the water glass again. This time, she did not even wrap her fingers around it. Instead, her eyes shifted toward the red folder lying in front of Vance, the folder he had placed on the table nearly an hour earlier and had never opened. Her gaze remained there. Vance saw precisely what she was watching. You have been staring at this folder from the moment I placed it on the table, he said. So let us stop pretending it is not the reason we are both sitting here this morning. He laid 2 fingers flat across its cover. He still did not open it. I promised you a particular day, one day in September, one individual trade. But before I show it to you, I have one final question. I want you to answer it directly for the camera so there can be no misunderstanding later about what you said or the exact moment when you said it. He looked at her and waited until she met his eyes. To be completely clear, on the official record, before this hearing and before the entire country, are you testifying that you possessed no knowledge of your family's trades, that you did not monitor them, and that you did not know what was being purchased, what was being sold, or when any of those transactions occurred? Is that your testimony? The chamber waited. Pelosi had been trapped before. She had spent 4 decades inside rooms like this and had learned one of Washington's oldest lessons. When cornered, do not withdraw. Assert yourself. Repeat the claim more forcefully. Look directly into the eyes of the person challenging you and dare them to disprove it. By now, that reaction was instinctive, older, and faster than conscious thought. That is correct, she said. Her answer was firm. As she spoke, she turned and faced the camera at the rear of the room. I did not monitor the trades. I did not know the details. My husband managed our family's investments as he has always done. That is the truth, Senator. It has always been the truth. Vance nodded slowly. He now possessed exactly what he needed. She had delivered the final piece on camera, in her own voice and in her own words. She still did not understand that the trap had already closed silently behind her. "Thank you," he said. "I wanted to be absolutely certain." His palm rested flat across the folder. Then Vance opened it. He did not remove a thick stack of documents. He withdrew one sheet of paper and rotated it so that the camera at the back of the chamber could see it. Then he began speaking, and with each sentence his words became shorter until almost nothing remained except the facts. "September," he said. "Your husband sold a substantial position in Visa, a very substantial position. The disclosure is here in my hand." He paused. One single day later, the Department of Justice announced a major federal lawsuit against Visa. The company's shares declined, but your family had already sold its position. Not 1 week earlier, not 1 month earlier, one day. He placed the page on the table. "Now return with me to December 2022 NVIDIA. The semiconductor investments we discussed earlier, those shares were purchased shortly before the Congress you led voted on legislation directing billions of federal dollars into the semiconductor industry." He looked across the table, placed the two transactions side by side. Visa sold one day before the lawsuit. NVIDIA purchased immediately before the vote. Different years, different companies. Exactly the same pattern. Each time, your family remained one perfect step ahead of information the general public did not yet possess. The names he had quietly introduced nearly an hour earlier now returned all at once. Visa, September, NVIDIA, the vote. They had been present throughout the hearing, small, unexplained details mentioned and then deliberately left alone. Now they came together in one movement, and the full shape of the accusation snapped into focus for everyone listening. "And 2 minutes ago," Vance said, "you looked into that camera and told the entire country in your own voice that you knew nothing about any of it." He allowed the statement to settle. "So only two possibilities remain in this room. Either you truly knew nothing, and through completely blind fortune, your family sold Visa exactly one day before a federal lawsuit and purchased NVIDIA and Drambate before your own congressional vote, repeatedly achieving timing that no professional trader alive has ever matched, or you knew and you have just told the country under oath on the official record that you did not." Pelosi's mouth opened. For the first time that morning, no complete sentence followed, no polished response, no practiced diversion, not one word. Vance did not raise his voice for the final statement. He did the opposite. He lowered it. 8 words, delivered quietly and without emotion, carried all the way to the chamber's back wall. They lost everything. You knew the day before. The room did not erupt. It did precisely the opposite. It became entirely silent. It was a silence with physical weight, the kind that seemed to press against every person's ears. Nobody continued writing. Nobody whispered to the person beside them. The only remaining sound in Dirksen 138 was the faint electrical hum of the cameras positioned along the wall. Pelosi remained completely still. This time, she did not reach toward the water. She stared down at the single page facing her across the table. She did not pick it up. She did not respond because there was no response left that anyone inside the room would have accepted. The chairman waited. He allowed her the full amount of time normally given to a witness preparing an answer. Then he waited even longer because everyone present now understood that the amount of time no longer mattered. No length of silence would eventually produce a reply. "The witness will," the chairman began. Then he stopped because even he seemed uncertain how the sentence could be completed. Pelosi gathered her leather folder. Her hands remain steady in the particular way. Hands remain steady when someone is concentrating intensely on preventing them from shaking. She did not look toward the camera she had confidently addressed throughout the morning. She stood from her chair, and in a room where she had spent nearly 40 years playing countless roles but had never once been the person who departed first, she became that morning the person who left first. Vance did not turn to watch her leave. He did not recline in his chair. He did not allow himself even the smallest smile. He closed the red folder, aligned its edges with 2 fingers exactly as he had at the beginning of the hearing, and placed both hands flat over it. If you have ever sat in your living room, watching one year pass into another, and quietly suspected that those at the very top were operating under rules different from the ones imposed upon you, remember what you have just witnessed, because you were not imagining it. You had been right all along. Send this to someone who always sensed it instinctively but never had an opportunity to watch the evidence placed openly on the table. The page remained where it had been after Pelosi left. September. 1 day. 1 trade. The camera continued to focus on it and refused to turn away. By that evening, the clip had spread everywhere, not the entire hearing, only the final 90 seconds. The single sheet of paper, the 6 words. Pelosi rising from her chair and walking out of a chamber she once appeared to control. It traveled across the country in the way only certain moments travel, the moments that give language to something millions of people have felt for years but were never able to demonstrate. And this is what did not happen afterward. Nobody publicly defended her. The allies who had stood beside her for decades, shared campaign stages with her, and attended the same fundraisers became silent. Not one stepped in front of a camera to argue that she had been treated unjustly. They had watched the same 90 seconds as everyone else. They had performed the same calculation, and none of them wanted to stand beside that page. The silence surrounding her communicated its own story more powerfully than any formal statement could have done. Then came the consequence no folder could repair. For years, Pelosi had resisted a ban on congressional stock trading. She had characterized the issue as a matter of personal freedom. Now, during the final months of her time in office, the House passed that ban with 232 votes. The law prohibited members of Congress, their spouses, and their children from trading individual stocks. The measure she had prevented from advancing for years became law as she was leaving office. And it did not pass unnoticed. Her name was attached to it throughout the reporting, the debate, and the public conversation. Her own portfolio became the central example. The most closely followed brokerage account in America became the reason the door was finally being closed. She had spent years building a fortune valued at $278 million. Not $1 of it could purchase back what she lost that morning. Because this is the part that remains. Pelosi served in Washington for nearly 40 years. She will receive a paragraph in future history books. Much of that paragraph will be factual, and portions of it will be impressive. But now, positioned near the beginning of that paragraph, ahead of nearly everything else, will be this. A law connected to her name. A law created to prevent the exact conduct she had spent her career defending. Like everyone in her position, she had worried about her legacy. She had wondered how history would describe her after she was gone. In the end, her legacy became a warning, a sentence in a civics lesson, a story a grandfather might tell his grandson about the morning the country finally caught one of them. That was the price. Not a financial penalty, not a prison cell, something more devastating for a person like her. Her name transformed into a warning against her own crime, then passed down to the children who would inherit the country. She helped bend children who would grow up inside a system made slightly straighter because of the morning she walked out of that room. America witnessed all of it. That is the thought worth carrying with you tonight. For years, people told you that you were cynical. They called you paranoid. They insisted the system was fair, that everyone operated under identical rules, and that the suspicion inside your gut was nothing more than bitterness disguised as understanding. Then, one morning, in a quiet congressional hearing room, the evidence was placed on a table and turned toward a camera. And it became clear that your suspicion had never been bitterness. It was memory. It was recognition of a pattern. It was the experience of being correct for years while nobody with power was willing to say the truth aloud. $30 million became $278 million. That was the number with which this story began. At first, it sounded like a story about a woman who possessed extraordinary skill in the stock market. It was never that story. It was a story about a country where the people who created the rules had learned how to exist above them, and about the morning one of those people was asked, before a camera, to explain the difference and discovered that she could not. That number will now follow her name into the history books, not as an achievement, but as evidence. If this hearing meant something to you, if it gave a name to a feeling you have carried for a long time, leave a comment containing the single word that describes what it felt like to finally witness this moment. And send it to someone who spent years being told that they had imagined the entire thing.